everybody, we are going to be making greeting cards. So start planning, start thinking ahead. What birthdays do you have coming up? Do you want to just make a thank you card for somebody? So I'm going to show you a few different ideas, but again, this is art. Get creative, use different colors, draw different imagery. This is all up to you. I hope you have a lot of fun. Before we get started, it's a good idea to plan out what you want to create for your greeting cards. I'm looking through my calendar and counting how many birthdays I have in the next 3 months. So I want to make 3 birthday cards, and then I also might want to make some holiday cards. Either look at a calendar or sit with a family member and ask for help. So there's a few different ways we can go about this. I have a 9x12 piece of paper, and that seems kind of large for a card, so I'm going to fold it in half and make sure that it's folded really well. This watercolor paper is a little bit thick, so I need to fold a few times so it opens and closes and acts more like a card. So once I have that done, I can make a couple of these, or I can always just start with my watercolors. So I'm going to start with filling my wells, making sure I have all the colors ready to go. My card is kind of opening, and that'll make it difficult to paint. So I'm going to leave it open while I paint so it lays flat on my table or my surface that I'm painting on. The first thing I want to do is a wash. I'm going to use water and my brush and just paint where I want my colors to be. I'm sort of staying away from the edges because I think this might make it look a little more interesting. But again, this is your card, it's up to you. Now I'm ready to start adding my pigment. You'll notice that once you start adding the color, it'll sort of spread into that water on its own. That's the effect I'm going for. So start thinking about what colors might look nice next to each other, but really this is all up to you. Have a lot of fun with it and don't be afraid to make any mistakes. I want my edges to look sort of soft, so I'm going to add just water with my brush and soften up the edges so they're not so harsh. Remember, our watercolor will always dry a little bit lighter, so if it's pretty light, you can always add more pigment as you're going. Something else that's kind of fun is you can hold up your paper vertically and let some of that top color fade into the bottom color. Just be careful that it doesn't spread too far and mix into all one solid color. Those two cards need time to dry before we write on top of them. So now I'm going to start a card where I actually sketch something out. Remember, you can draw anything you want. I'm going to be drawing a cupcake, but you can use your imagination and draw anything you'd like. Here's how we draw a cupcake. I am going to be using a glazing technique, so you want to have your first layer be pretty light. I used a little bit too much pigment, so I'm going to rinse and dry my brush and try again. I want this to be pretty light and cover the entire drawing. It's important to remember that wet watercolor next to wet watercolor will mix, so I'm leaving a tiny little bit of white paper in between my yellow and my blue so that it doesn't turn green. For my candle, I'm going to barely use any water. The less water I use, the more control I have, so I can get more straight edges, like for any kind of detail work. I'm going to be using the same dry brush technique to make my last card. So barely any water, a lot of pigment. I'm going to have a lot more control so I can pretty much draw with the watercolor paint. This whole card will be covered in hearts, but you can decide on any image you'd like. It might be fun to add one extra color on one side of the heart, just to make it look a little bit like a shadow and a little more interesting. If you want to leave your card as is, you can. If you'd like to add some splatter paint, here's how I recommend you do it. Add a lot of water to your brush, make sure there's pigment on there, carefully hold your paintbrush on top of your paper, and then use your other hand to gently tap the top, closer to where the bristles are. While I've been working on my last card, my cupcake has had plenty of time to dry. I'm ready to start adding other layers of color. You can use the back of your finger and check that it's not cold. If it's still cold, then it's wet. It has to be dry, and I'm just adding a really light layer of orange, or any other color you'd like to add on top of your first color is fine. I just want to make sure some of that yellow is still shining through, so it looks more like the glaze technique that we were discussing earlier and less like I'm just covering it all up. Our first couple of cards should have had plenty of time to dry, so now we're ready for our lettering. Remember, you can come up with any words, anything you'd like to say on the cover. This is all up to you. I can gently use pencil, making sure I'm really light with my pressure, and that way if I needed to erase or I didn't like something, it's easy to do. Be really careful though, because your paper might be a little bit fragile after all that watercolor. A general rule of thumb when I'm lettering is any down strokes that I'm using with my Sharpie should be a little thicker than my up strokes. So I'm adding a couple layers when I pull down with my hand on my H, but when I pull up it should be thin. This might take a little practice to get used to, or you could always look at a reference photo of lettering techniques, and I'll leave all of this up to you. This is just an idea. I hope you had a lot of fun, and I can't wait to see what you all created.